We tend to think of the U.S. Constitution as this solid, clear rulebook, right? But when it comes to one of the biggest questions, who gets the power, the federal government or the states, it's not a rulebook at all. It's more like the starting gun for a tug of war that's been going on for over 200 years.
And that is the big question the Constitution never really answers. It sets up this system, federalism, with 2 layers of government, but then it gets kind of vague. It deliberately leaves the lines blurry, and because of that ambiguity, the fight over who's really in charge has been raging ever since.
Yeah, that intentional blurriness, that's what fuels the whole conflict. For more than 200 years, it's been this constant back and forth, a pull between federal power and states' rights. So let's grab our end of the rope and see how the federal government tries to yank it its way. All right, let's start with Team Federal. How did a national government that was supposed to have limited powers end up stretching its authority so much? I mean, really, how did that happen? Well, the answer is hiding in a few very clever, very powerful clauses in the Constitution. Okay, so the starting point seems pretty straightforward. It's what we call enumerated powers. These are the powers literally written down, spelled out in the Constitution. It's like a to-do list for Congress. Can they levy taxes? Yep, check. Declare war? You got it. Check. Set up post offices? Check. These are the powers nobody argues about. They're the baseline.
But hang on a second. The federal government does way, way more than just what's on that list, right? So where does it get the power for all that other stuff? Answering that question gets us into one of the most powerful and debated ideas in all of American law.
Let's break it down with this simple analogy. Imagine your parents promise to buy you ice cream. That's the enumerated power. It's a promise. But the ice cream shop is downtown, so you have to take a bus to get there. Now here's the conflict. Should they also pay for your bus ticket? You're going to say, of course, it's necessary to get the ice cream. But they might fire back, nope, we only promised to pay for the ice cream. And believe it or not, that is the entire debate over federal power in a nutshell.
And this is where we get the idea of implied powers. The argument comes from a little something called the necessary and proper clause. It basically says Congress can make any laws that are, well, necessary and proper to carry out its listed duties. So in our ice cream story, that clause is you arguing for the bus fare. And in the real world, it's been used to justify everything from creating a national bank to passing federal drug laws. It's a huge deal.
Now, this wasn't just some dusty old theoretical debate. Oh, no. In 1819, it completely exploded in a massive Supreme Court showdown, a case that would change the balance of power in America forever. And it all started with a fight over a bank. So here's the scene. The brand new federal government creates a national bank. But the state of Maryland, not a fan. They saw it as competition, so they decided to tax it heavily. This set up 2 gigantic constitutional questions. First, can Congress even create a bank if that power isn't written down in the Constitution? And second, even if it can a state turn around and try to tax a federal agency? The Chief Justice at the time, John Marshall, saw right through this. He knew exactly what was at stake. If Maryland could tax the national bank, it could tax it right out of existence. He wrote this incredibly famous line, "The power to tax involves the power to destroy." He was basically saying, look, if we let a state crush a federal institution, the whole system gets flipped on its head. The federal government would be powerless.
And the court's ruling? It was a knockout punch, unanimous and crystal clear. First, they said, yes, Congress does have implied powers, thanks to that necessary and proper clause. And second, based on the supremacy clause, they ruled that states absolutely cannot interfere with legitimate federal actions. This was a monster win for federal power, a huge, powerful pull on that constitutional rope.
But hold on, the tug of war is far from over. The states have their own secret weapon, a constitutional anchor that's designed to stop the federal government from just running away with all the power. So let's switch sides and see how the states pull back.
And that anchor is the 10th Amendment. It's really the heart and soul of the whole states' rights argument. It's super clear. It says, hey, any power that we didn't specifically give to the federal government, well, that belongs to the states or to the people. You got to remember, the folks who were worried about a too powerful central government, the Anti-Federalists, they insisted on this to try and keep the feds in their box.
So you see the clash right here. It's perfect. On one side, you've got the necessary and proper clause, which is like this constitutional rubber band, letting federal power stretch and stretch. And on the other side, you've got the 10th Amendment, which is the anchor, trying to hold things in place for the states. These 2 ideas are just locked in this constant battle.
Okay, so for decades, this back and forth continues. But then,
the Civil War happens. And in its aftermath, a new amendment gets passed that completely changes the rules of the game. It hands the federal government a brand new, very powerful tool.
We're talking about the 14th Amendment, and it was nothing short of revolutionary. It said that no state could deny people their rights. Now, this might sound obvious to us today, but before this, the Bill of Rights was mostly seen as a limit on the federal government. But now, for the very first time, the Constitution gave the federal government the authority to look over the state's shoulders, to act like a supervisor and make sure they were actually protecting the rights of their own citizens.
So you add up implied powers and the 14th Amendment, and what do you get? A massive expansion of federal authority all through the 20th century. It seemed like the rope was just slipping more and more to the federal side. But then, in 1995, the Supreme Court decided to grab that rope and give it a massive yank back in the other direction. They drew a new line in the sand.
The case was called U.S. v. Lopez. Here's what happened. Congress passed a law making it a federal crime to have a gun in a school zone. Now, how did they justify that? They used their power to regulate interstate commerce. The argument was basically, well, guns in schools lead to violence, which disrupts education, which hurts the national economy. It's kind of a stretch, right? Well, a student who got charged under this law thought so too, and he fought back. He argued that school safety is a local issue for states to handle, not the federal government. In the Supreme Court, they weren't buying it, not at all. Chief Justice Rehnquist, who wrote the decision, said that for the court to believe the government's logic, they'd have to pile inference upon inference. Basically, they'd have to connect too many dots that just weren't there. He pointed out that if this argument was okay, then what couldn't Congress regulate? They could link almost anything to the national economy. The court decided the link here was just way too weak. So in a really tight 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court struck the law down. This was a huge win for states' rights. It was actually the first time in about 60 years that the court had said, whoa, hold on to Congress's power to regulate commerce. The states had finally, successfully yanked that rope back.
So where does all this leave us today? Well, this constant back and forth, this tug-of-war, it's not just some old history lesson. It's at the very heart of the political debates we're having right now.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It shows you everything. The balance of power is never, ever locked in place. You have McCulloch in 1819 giving the feds a huge boost. Then you have Lopez in 1995 pulling things back toward the states. The center of political gravity is just always moving.
Think about that. For more than 200 years, this fundamental fight, which is baked right into the Constitution itself, has shaped American law and politics. It was there at the very beginning, and it is absolutely still raging today. So the next time you hear a debate about who should be in charge of healthcare or environmental rules or education, you'll know what's really going on. You're watching another round of this constitutional tug-of-war. It's a game with no final buzzer, leaving it up to every single generation to keep grappling with that one huge question: who gets to decide?